welcome to Tell Muses, a podcast all about the wonderful art of oral storytelling, a podcast for storytellers, with storytellers, by storytellers. Today, Despina and I are joined by the wonderful Jim Hawkins. Hello, Jim, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Hello, Jim, and welcome. It's very nice to have you with us all the way from the US.
Okay, my pleasure to be here with you.
Jim, I'd like to start this interview by asking you a few things about yourself. So, for people who don't know you, would you like to tell a few things about who James Hawkins is?
Sure. Well, first of all, I was born in New York City, a place called Queens, which happens to be Astoria, Queens, actually happens to be a very strong, and still today, a very strong Greek neighborhood. My friend, you probably know Barbara Alaprantis, who is on Story Space, comes from Astoria. But I was born there, but my parents were both native Irish. And so when I was a year and a half in 1947, went back to Ireland. My father built a house where my mom grew up. And in my dad's mind, I'm sure, because he had a passionate love for his own country, I'm sure he intended that he was never going to leave again. So we stayed for 10 years. And of course, my love for story actually started there. My Uncle Jack, who lived down the road from us, was a natural storyteller. He didn't, he wasn't trained in any way, but they have a wonderful phrase. I don't know whether it's just the Irish language or maybe it's in other languages. They say, if you're good at something, for example, if you're good, you're a mechanic, an electrician, you're a good teacher, so forth. They say you have the nya for it. It's like a nonsense word. Well, my Uncle Jack had the nya for telling stories. I was fascinated by him. I'd be down in his house an awful lot, and sometimes I'd be sitting next to him, or I might be sitting on his knee, and he would just start to tell stories, just local stories, randomly about people and what was going on. And he sort of had a main plot, and then as he went along, he brought other people into it. And as I said, I was fascinated by this as a kid. And also, of course, there was people who visited all the time, and there were local stories, and I heard these, and again, I just loved hearing them. In 1956, we returned to New York, and I went to grammar school there, went to high school and college. In college, I was an English major, studying English and education as my major, and I became an English teacher. And of course, all of this time, I've always loved stories. I was always reading books of stories and so forth. And then when I began teaching, obviously English, or teaching English literature, you're dealing with the great classics, the great stories, what they call the canon of literature. And for 39 years, I had the pleasure of teaching junior high school, what they call, and senior high school in America. I said I told stories because they were part of the curriculum, but I also would take many times, let's say on a Friday, at the end of the week, I'd take some time to talk to the kids, find out what was going on, what were they doing for the weekend, and I would tell them a short story or a short anecdote. And so, as I said, I did that for all of the 39 years that I taught. As well, on my own time, I was doing local theater here on Long Island where I live, some of it in New York City. I was very much involved with the called the Irish Arts Center in New York City, which was founded basically about 1971, 72. And the wonderful thing, the Arts Center did everything. It taught music, dance. They had theater, ran a magazine, and classes in dancing. And one of the things that they put together, and I became part of it, was something called a shimsa. Now, a shimsa in the Irish language means a gathering, a coming together. And most of the time it could be a coming together to perform, to celebrate. So they took that idea and told the history of the Irish people and culture from pre-Christian times right up until the 1980s. And it was done through music, singing, dancing, and storytelling. And one of the parts of it was there was a story in there, a very famous Irish satirist who wrote a story literally satirizing the British practice in Ireland. One of the things the British tried to do when they invaded Ireland was they tried to destroy the language. And this story satirizes a very funny story called The Poor Mouth. So I started eventually, started telling that story. And at that point, I realized I had done a lot of theater, but I'd got to the point where I'd sort of got tired of all the rehearsals in the sense of, well, it was just that I did a lot of it. And then I saw storytelling, and I was doing it basically on my own. I said, well, here's something where I love stories, and I can do them myself, and then I can share them, share them with the world in a sense. So it's from there, I'd say the last 30 years, I've been telling stories. Mostly I started out, I've done Irish stories because that's what I know, and I continue to tell them. I mean, the month of March here, I'm just starting this week. I'm doing a fair amount of telling, but I've also moved to telling personal stories, and I do a performance called "Growing Up in America." And it's a whole series of stories, literally starting with when I came back here as 10 years old and taking me all the way through my, high school, college years into my teaching years. And also I do a program of children's stories. I'm trying to learn more stories from different cultures from around the world. So that's where I am right now.
Awesome. There are so many different fragments I want to ask you questions about.
Yeah.
The good thing is there is a common denominator between us because we are three English teachers, Jim.
Right. Right.
Even a retired one.
Right. It's been a lot of fun and bringing the idea of, some joy into people's lives. And the thing that's been amazing about when the COVID came along, and of course Zoom, it just has done an amazing thing for the storytelling world. The fact that here I am living in New York and I can come in and I'm talking to you and you're living in, it's just amazing. I've met so many people, different cultures from all over the world, and wonderful storytellers. And I basically go into two groups during the week. I feel like they're my family. I physically have not met them, or most of them I have not met, but that's a wonderful thing, and it's great that it's continuing,
My friend John Rowe calls this thing the magic carpet.
And yes, good description for it, really, so.
So, a question. The Samsha you were describing, that sounds like a Kaylee. Is it the same thing, in other words?
Yeah, it's a little different. Kaylee is really mostly it's music and dance, right? If you go to a Kaylee, it's going to be basically dancing. And the word Kaylee means to literally dance together. The Shimsa more broader, in the sense of it was used in the sense you would, you would bring in storytelling, songs, and so forth. So it's just, as I said, it brings in more, more elements to it. Where we think Kelly, even today, Kelly, you think dance, music and dance. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jim, we also on the podcast we interviewed some Irish storytellers, and we're friends with many Irish storytellers that we met throughout the years. And
Uh-huh.
I'm just curious to know. Well, I've got many questions actually, so I'll just start, and then you can elaborate on that. So, what part of Ireland did you live in? And did you told us about your uncle Jack who used to tell you stories. So did
Mm-hmm.
he tell you stories about that part of Ireland, or Irish
Yeah.
stories in
Yeah. Okay.
general, legends, local myths?
Okay.
So what kind of stories?
The part of Ireland that I grew up in is known generally as what they call the Midlands, or the Middle Lands of Ireland. It's the area of Ireland about 50 miles. It starts, so I say, approximately 50 miles southwest of Dublin. And as you go through the country, and interesting, Ireland is it's not a large country, about 316 miles, I'd say, on length, maybe 250 in width, just generally. But I grew up in, as I said, the Midlands, and it's known for having very good land. And so, as I said, now my mom was from there where I grew up. That's we went back, and my father was more from the western part of Ireland. So, oh.
And what kind of stories did your uncle used to tell you? Were
Yeah.
they stories from that particular region?
Oh yeah, it was all local stories. My uncle Jack didn't, wasn't like he went looking for, although he might have been aware of. He didn't go looking for, let's say, Irish myths and legends like Finn McCool or Cahalan. And it was just a natural ability that had. He was quite a character. He just loved, well, he loved people, he loved talking to people, but he loved just telling about incidents that took place in, like our own communities. He said whatever happened in the town and the area that day. And he had a great ability to imitate some of the local people in the area, particularly if they were kind of unusual characters. And as I said, as a child, I was fascinated by him doing this. It was just part of him. There was nothing planned out. He would start, and away he'd go. So
It must be in the genes because Irish have a huge tradition in storytelling, and I think it's part of who you are, really. It's part of the culture.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah, and of course Ireland is. Well, you said you've talked to some of the storytellers throughout a tremendous amount, but I think that's true of every culture. I mean, if you go looking for storytellers in every culture, they're there. It's just part of being human, really.
It
Because
is,
we all have stories.
the thing
Starting with
is,
our families and our communities and our neighborhoods and everything, and the same goes true for Ireland. So yeah,
pardon, you're
bless
absolutely
you.
right. Thank you. Everybody's got stories, but the thing is, the Irish never lost it. There is
No,
no cutting the thread.
well, they talk about that phrase about kissing the Blarney Stone. Have you heard that? That phrase? Well, the Blarney Stone it's a big tourist thing in Ireland. I'm trying to remember now, what county is he in? Is it Limerick? There's a big stone, and in this castle, in Blarney Castle, and one of the things is that they will they will sort of hold your legs and you lean down under this and you kiss this stone. And of course, the belief has come out if, somebody who's a talker or a charmer or whatever, that he or she has kissed the Blarney stone. So that's, that's where that belief has come from.
That is where they got the nya then.
Yes, I got the nya from, right. The nya came from the stone. There you go. I never thought of that, Despina. We'll give the stone credit. We'll give the stone credit for it.
Yeah, absolutely. To have the nya is like to have the knack, in short.
Yes, the knack. Yeah. And you're right. Yeah. That's exactly what it means. I don't even know how you would even spell it, but I heard it, and you'll sometimes
from the Irish I've seen, it would be in some ineligible way.
Yeah, I still hear you'll still hear Irish people. Many times I heard, like somebody who's a good carpenter or electrician. That fella has the nya for us, is the way they would talk about it. So. Yeah.
And you're very right about the language. I know that the English, when they conquered some land anywhere, the first thing they would do would be to ban the native language. They've done it all over the place. But luckily, well, we've had Lvier to begin this podcast with. And then we had Maria Gillen.
Oh, Marie is,
Marie.
Yeah, Marie's wonderful.
They're both wonderful, both wonderful ladies.
Who was the first person that you mentioned?
Liz Weir was the first one we interviewed. So she lives in Northern Ireland.
Yes, she does.
Maria Gillen lives in Cork. So Maria, in the part of the country where she lives, Irish is still very much alive, whereas in the northern part, it's kind of lost.
Well, you know what's happening with it? It's getting a tremendous revival. I mean, going back in times, the Irish language was, the strongest community was in the west coast of Ireland, right? And what they were called Gaeltacht areas. Gaeltacht or Gaeltacht mean places that the Irish language is spoken. And then, of course, when the English came and the influence of English and so forth over the many hundreds of years, you had communities, and I lived in one in the 1970s for several summers. They became known what is brocht. Brocht meaning broken Gaeltacht. So the village that a lot of us in the Irish Center, we went over we were trying to learn the language. Well, the local peoples could speak English and speak Irish fluently, right? And still I would say there's maybe one or two left. I don't know to be sure, but there are some islands off the coast of Ireland where still they only speak Irish. Or maybe they might know how to speak English, but if you're coming in as an outsider, they're going to expect you to be able to handle their language. Which is a great thing because it's a wonderful language. But what's happening now, and it's happening in America around where I live, most of the colleges in the local area, they all give Irish language classes. And it's happening in Chicago, it's happening in major cities throughout the United States, and it's happening, I've heard it's happening in Ireland. In fact, there are people in certain parts of Ireland are buying houses in the same community so they can speak Irish all the time. And there's a movement that people have asked the government to open up more schools where all of the subjects are taught in Irish. So it's getting a great revival, and which is a wonderful thing because literally the Brits did try to destroy it, but the Irish people in there, and would not allow that to happen. They would not allow their language to be taken away from them. It was like taking away their identity, And as I said, a tremendous revival of it and interest in now. Nice to see young people learning the language, So.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim, you mentioned also that in America there's a big revival of the Irish language, and my question was just about this because, as we know, there's been a big migration of Irish people towards America, and mainly like the eastern coast cities have a big Irish descendant. Is that the
Mhm.
right word?
Mhm.
Um, and I was wondering, how is it to be an Irishman living in America? Because both of your parents were Irish,
Right.
and you also lived in Ireland, and now you live in America in a community where there are lots of people who descended from who have Irish roots. So
Mhm.
it's the same culture, but it's a different culture at the same
Yeah.
time. And so you can tell stories, but you've got something a bit different from just being uh, lots of generations um, after their parents, grandparents came to
Mhm.
Ireland, maybe. But you also lived in Ireland. How
Yeah.
is it to?
Well, there's a whole history, of course, of the Irish not only migrating to the United States but migrating to other countries in the world. And what happened, particularly, you're probably aware of the famine people time in Ireland, the 1800s, actually should be called. It's incorrect to call it the famine, and you hear it referred to as that. It should be called the Great Hunger. And there's a difference between a famine is when there is no food in the country, like for example the potato famine. The potatoes died of blight. But in the case of Ireland, there was enough food in the country to feed the people even when the blight came. The British removed it. And so it was an act of genocide is probably the best way to look at it. So because of that, I mean, and other reasons, there's always been a flow. An awful lot of Irish left Ireland. An awful lot of them most of them probably came to America. Interesting in terms of different parts of the country. An awful lot came to New York. Um, and then from other sections of Ireland, they went to Chicago. Other sections, they went to Cleveland. So the Irish came in different parts of the country. Also, an awful lot of Irish went to Australia. There's an awful lot of Irish in Australia, an awful lot of Irish in New Zealand. And of course, over the years, the flow has gone back and forth. The Irish come here, obviously better opportunities. And there's been periods going back and forth where all of a sudden the Irish economy will recover itself and doing very well. And because people want to be back in their own native homes, they'll go back home, right? And if the economy goes bad again and there is no work, they'll come back here. They'll go to Australia or they'll go to wherever. So there's a whole history of that, Simona. No.
It's weird that you mentioned, we know that there's a great diaspora of Irish people all over the globe, really.
Yes, yeah. You'll
If you
find Irish everywhere. I'll give you a good example. One time, I mean, I've been playing around with the Irish language myself for years. I'm never going to be a fluent speaker. I just feel it's my obligation as if I'm going to be telling Irish stories and the language come into it, I should have a working knowledge of it. But I got away from it a couple of years, and a couple of years ago, I started to pick up and go to classes again. And one, I was just curious about how much or where in the world the Irish language was being, taught. Well, I'm probably still, there's a place in Russia where somebody is teaching the Irish language. Yeah. And of course, you've heard of river dance. You've heard of river dance? Well, amazing thing what river dance did. and Riverdance came about because they have something, and you probably know of this every summer. They call it the Eurovision contest. And Eurovision, and in this, I forget now the year was, the host country is responsible providing for, I think, 10 minutes of entertainment at the intermission. Well, one of them was this dance piece led by Blackley, and it just blew the place. It's just amazing. People were, and of course, he took the idea and then ran with it and brought in other dances from other cultures throughout the world. So it's, as I said, it's, the revival of music and dancing. I mean, there's now dance groups all over the world. There are Irish dance groups in Russia as well, and I'm sure a lot of other, probably dance groups in Greece. I would think as well, based on river dance. So
yes, of course, there's the Greek-Irish community here in Athens that does a lot of activities. They're very, very active. But I was trying to make another point earlier, James. I was trying to say that it was a very weird coincidence that you would get to mention Australia first as the first country where loads of people went, other than the US, loads of people of Irish descent, because I was just reading an article online from the ABC, which is the Australian Broadcasting Channel, and they were talking about their efforts to revive the Wiradjuri language, which is apparently the Aboriginal language that was also banned when the English people colonized Australia. And now they are making an effort to bring that original language back. So every time I hear about revival of any language that could have been lost in time, I think it's a gain for humanity.
yeah. Well, so I understand, BB Australia. One of the things that happens when the British, at one point, when again they were trying to literally destroy Ireland, they threw an awful lot of people out of the country, or people tried to escape. And one of the place, and Australia was the place they went. And the Irish the Irish referred to it as Van Diemen's Land. I'll be honest with you right now. I don't remember exactly the history, the reference Van Diemen, but Van Diemen's Land is now the modern day Tasmania, country of Tasmania, which I believe is right beside Australia. A lot of times when people were deported from the country, they didn't get back. They didn't get back. They settled in Australia, New Zealand, started a whole new life. Now, there's another history, which we don't go into, of people who were there, who were imprisoned, and there was revolts, and they escaped, and they were able to get themselves back to Ireland again. So there's a whole history of that, So.
And I think it's about time I asked you, right now, as we speak, Jim, is there any one particular story that is trying to jump out of your head and be shared?
Yeah. When you said to me about, and I asked you, and I said a story that has, great meaning for me, and I've chosen two. The first one is a story from my childhood, and it's called Mr. Murtaugh. If you were to visit my village, Castletown Gagan, County Westmeath, in the Midlands of Ireland, most likely you would have gone into Claffey's shop. And in there, you might have noticed a very tall, thin man sitting on a stool reading a newspaper that was literally pulled up to the tip of his nose. And you might have thought to yourself, he seems like a very unusual man. And then if you looked a little closer, you would have noticed that he wore a very thick, pair of glasses on a very angular face. And you could be sure that that newspaper was read from the opening advertisement to the opening date to the closing advertisement or advertisement, he would say. And if you continue to stare and he noticed you, he might have put down the newspaper, looked up at you and smiled and said, "It's Jesus Christ himself, you think you're looking at, isn't it?" And you would have just met Bill Murtagh, one of the most endearing people of my childhood. Now, Bill lived down the fields from us. He made his living. He was a farmer. He sprayed the potatoes in season, and he raised horses, some of them prize-winning horses. Now, Bill never married. What woman in her right mind would have the likes of me, he'd say, and he'd chuckle about that. But even though he lived on his own, he wasn't a recluse. In fact, he was a very friendly man. Now, at that time of my childhood, we didn't have television, we had radio. But one of the things that people did to socialize all the time, they went to each other's houses at night. The term was, they were called ramblers. They would ramble to people's houses to talk, play music, dance, sing, and tell stories. Now, Bill was out, I would say, probably 4 or 5 times of the week, and he would ramble to different houses in our community. Most of the time when he did ramble, he either stopped in my Uncle Jack's house, which was down the road from us, or our house. And I always made sure I got a seat right next to Bill because I was fascinated by him when he spoke. He always called me Seamus Avic. Seamus is Jim in the Irish language, and Avic means dear one or son. I always called him Mr. Murtagh. And as I said, I was fascinated. Bill could talk about anything. He was literally a prolific reader. I remember he would talk about the habits of birds, swallows, ways to raise prize-winning horses. In fact, I remember Bill talking about the coming computer age. And I would sit there and I would listen. And as I said, as other people were, I was fascinated. Now, when he went out on these rambles, when he'd be coming home at night, I might already be in bed, it might be 10 or 11 o'clock. He always stopped at our house. Now, Bill loved tea, brown bread, and butter. So when we went to bed, my mother always left a pot of tea, brown bread, and butter on the table for him. And sometimes I would be just maybe falling asleep, and I would hear Bill coming in the door, and he would walk in very quietly, and he would go over and he'd get the pot, and he'd have his tea, and his brown bread and butter. Afterwards, he would wash the dishes, or the delf, as they were called at that time, and then he would go off home. And I said, this was something that was done on a regular basis. Now, one of the things Bill did all of the time, he was always out on the road. He was good going off to Mullingar the next town. He had to do, different errands. He would be buying things and so forth. And many times he would ask me to go with him. And of course, I loved going with him. And my parents would always let me go because they knew Bill would take good care of me. So I would get up into the cart beside him, and he had the horse and cart. If it was a cold day, Bill would put a blanket across the two of us. And we'd start off, and Bill would start talking. And I think it was like an education for me. Some days he'd be talking, we'd be in the Piccadilly Circus in London or the Tower of London. The next time we might be walking down the Champs-Elysees in Paris. The next time we might be going in the Vatican, walking through the Vatican museums and standing in the yard where the Pope spoke to people. And of course, he always talked about the beauties of his own country, the Dingle Peninsula, and the beauties of Galway, and many other places. The last thing we did before we'd come home from these little journeys, these little trips, we would go into Claffey shops. He would buy me an ice cream and a bag of sweets, candy. That's what they called them, a bag of sweets. He always also bought a bag of groceries for my parents. We would go back home. My mother would make dinner, and we would all sit around and talk for a couple of hours. Most of the time, I sat and I listened because I was fascinated by the conversation and what Bill would be talking about. At the end of the night, he picked up his lamp and he went home across the fields. And many times I wonder if Bill feels lonely walking across those fields and entering that empty house on his own. Well, if he did, I don't ever remember him showing that. He seemed to be very comfortable in his own life and his own skin. Now, when I was 10 years old, my parents decided to come back to New York City for economic reasons, better life for us. And my reaction to this, on one hand, I was very much against it because this was the life that I knew. My cousins were literally my sister, my brothers and my sister. I'm an only child, and the thought of leaving them behind was very frightening. On the other hand, I was intrigued by the idea of coming to America, and I wondered what it would be like. Well, on my last trips with Bill, and we went out and so forth, I said, Mr. Murtaugh, could you tell me what you know about America and about New York? And Bill just talked. I mean, he talked about Times Square, he talked about Greenwich Village, the Empire State Building, so many other things. So by the time we were about to leave, okay, I was pretty well educated as to what to expect. But probably the most important thing he said to me the last time we were together, he said, now listen to me, Vic. He said, I'm going to tell you, you're not going to like America at first. In fact, you're going to hate it. But you have wonderful parents. You have wonderful family there. You have wonderful friends, and they will guide you and they will direct you. And I promise you that in time, you will come to love living in New York. Well, as usual, Bill was right. When we moved back to Queens, I hated it, absolutely hated it. It was such a change of culture and education and school and so forth. It took me quite a long time, I would say close to almost 2 to 3 years before I fully adapted and finally came to love growing up in Astoria, Queens. We didn't go back to my village for 7 years. 1963, summer of 1963, I was 17 years old and I had just finished my 3rd year in high school. And we were sitting in my Uncle Jack's house talking. And then my cousin Tommy said to me, Jimmy, look who's coming up the road. It was Bill in the horse and cart as usual. He looked a bit older, but of course that was understandable. I went out into the road And I opened up the gates and allowed him and the horse and cart to come into my Uncle Jack's yard. And as he came closer, and he still had the very thick glasses, he started to look at me. And then when he got inside the gate, he jumped down off the cart. And as he came to me, he said, "It's you, Vic, isn't it?" I said, "Yes, it is, Mr. Murtaugh." And we hugged each other with great affection. And then Bill held me back from him and he looked into my eyes. He said, Look at the wonderful young man you've become." I said, "Thanks, Mr. Murtaugh." He said, "Now, I'm going off to Mullingar. I have a lot of errands to do. I want you to get up here and go with me, and you can tell me all about your life in America." Thanks very much.
It was wonderful.
So
Yeah, he
moving.
just was a wonderful man. I was talking to my cousin, the same age as I am. We grew up together last night. And just as an afternoon, Bill eventually, well, he passed away about somewhere between 15 and 20 years ago, but eventually moved into an assisted living or nursing home in Mullingar, the next town. He wasn't able to go on his own. But one day, I guess the last time I saw him, we were home, and myself and my mother went in to visit him. Now, interestingly, and I'm not going to remember the man's name, there is an English historian, very, very well known, who is an expert on Irish history, has written many books about different aspects of Irish history. And here Bill had one of these on his bed. And I happened to look and I noticed, and of course, kiddingly, I said, "Bill, what are you reading that English rubbish for?" And he looks up at me and he always had this wonderful smile, this twinkle in his eye. And he looked at me and he said, "Remember, lad, always know what the enemy is thinking," was his response. He, as I said, he was just a wonderful neighbor. Times of crisis, Bill was always there. He was always willing to help, So, Mr. Murtaugh.
It's a wonderful story, and I think, well, you did him justice with this story.
Oh, thank you. Thank
His
you very much.
story goes on, and
Yeah.
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 And
Thank
I
you.
just love also this Irish. I've heard it from many Irish storytellers, but maybe it's just how Ireland is, that you tell stories of people that live down the road from you,
Yes.
in the farm down the road, or it's just wonderful. It gives a sense of peace and quiet,
Mm-hmm.
and a life that we don't live anymore in
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
modern society.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
Community. I
it's
think
true.
community is the most
Yeah,
important
Yes.
thing for the Irish.
Right. Well, I think it's all communed, just being the times before we had the television and so forth. So communities were very closer and they depended upon each other. And of course, communication. I'll give you probably one of the most important people in the community at the time, and in many cultures, the postman or the postwoman, the mailman. They were the ones we waited, and I've written a story about another. Our postman was Billy Whalen, and he was referred to as Whistling Billy. The reason was he was a musician as well, and he would play for the local competitions. So we knew when Billy was coming up the road, he was whistling. But we waited for him every day, particularly Christmas time. Christmas time, he was the local hero because he brought the news. if something was going on in somebody's house in the town or whatever, Billy brought that, and yeah, and that kind of, that kind of world. Sure, it's ended, but I always say, I always have to, you hear people sometimes criticizing young people today because of all the technology, the cell phones and so forth. I always say to them, okay, yes, that's happened, but let's be fair to them. If you and I, okay, and I'm 79 years old, were born into the world today, well, we would have to deal with it as well. You have to deal with the world that you're presented with. Okay, so we can see that. I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing. Like I'm retired now since 2009, but one of the things I would still love to be back in the classroom. Uh, you know, if I could get somebody to do all the technology and all the paperwork and so forth, and just talk to the kids, because talking to young people today, I find it's fascinating to talk to them to find out, how do they see life? How are they viewing? What are they dealing with, struggling with? And I think they can learn something from me because of the life that I've lived. And I think the world would be a lot better off if we had that combination of things. So, that's why I defend, as I said, young people. They're dealing with the world, you know. So, I mean, they complained about television when it came along, and television had its good and well, the technology, sure, it's got negative sides to it. I mean, I think some of these platforms are very dangerous in many ways, but yet at the same time, they're tremendous help in terms of, advancing our lives and helping our lives. So,
And language for us, we've
and
seen it.
oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. I mean, you can get all languages. I have an app or a thing. I get a different Irish word every day, and I'm sure
I
that's what in all other languages.
I think that at first people are scared of what is unknown to them, what is unfamiliar,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
that is exactly what progress is at
Yeah.
first. But once you do get familiar with it, surely we can find ways to use it to our advantage, whatever it might be.
Right.
It
Right.
was TV back then it
Yeah.
was the internet, now it's AI,
Yeah.
then we don't know what's going to be next. There's going to
Right.
be a next thing for sure.
Right.
I
The
wanted
only
to ask you, Jim, you said you're doing, now we're talking about online things. You said you're doing some things online, didn't you?
well, I mean, I go into, a couple of, you've been in, I've gone in, I go into Story Space every week,
Uh-huh.
that's on Tuesday night.
We
And
had
there's,
Bruce Marcus here the other
oh
day,
yeah,
and
Bruce is
he was
terrific.
telling us
Yeah,
about it.
Bruce is great. He's one of the great people, and I mean, there's six of them that run it, and they've been running it for over 30 years, and it's great. And then there's a wonderful group on Saturday mornings. It's run by Gail Herman that meets at 11 o'clock. So yeah, it is just amazing what we're able to do all this. The only thing I'd say this me, which I think maybe we'll get past it, when the cell phones came along and the platforms, and young people started to go to them, and particularly during the COVID, so the sense of, you know socializing with their own, continue to socialize, which we all need to do, to get into that world of the computers and the cell phones and forget about, living life with other people. I think that kind of introduced some problems. I have great empathy for parents today, raising kids and all of the stuff that they have to, watch out for and guard in terms of protecting their kids.
We are
So,
learning, we are learning, and we are teaching our kids on how
yeah,
to
we
protect
are.
themselves. I mean, that's the most important thing, that
Yeah,
it knows how to protect
yeah,
themselves, firstly.
yeah. Well, I'm very hopeful. I think it'll be all right. I mean, everybody worries about AI, I think they're like everything else is probably positive and negative, but overall, it looks like it can be a great help. You know,
Use
when it's used
exactly.
properly.
Things can be used as a tool, and they can be used as a weapon when we choose
Yes,
how to use them.
right,
So all
right,
the
right.
performances you said you were doing, where are they all in person?
Yeah, this next 2 weeks they're all in person. I usually do about, I'd say, an hour and 15 minutes, combination stories, songs, and so forth. And I think one of the great things about doing it is then to try and get people, talk about their own Irish connections and their families' connections and that kind of. I think that's part of it, you know.
Jim, would you said that you had two stories that you'd thought of to tell us.
Yeah.
Would you maybe
Uh,
like to tell us the second one?
Sure. This is a story from, I think I mentioned, I was a teacher. Had the honor of being a teacher for 39 years. And they were wonderful. I do it again. I always say that, well, I probably taught some things to my students, but they taught me a tremendous amount over the years. So this is a story from my teaching career. Now, as I said, I taught for 39 years, both on the junior high school level and the senior level, which runs like ages anywhere from 13 through 18, right? And the school system then at the time, um, uh, they had three levels, right? They had of students. They had honors, and the honors class were obviously the very very smart kids, and then they had the regents level. The regents level were the average learners, and then they were the non-regents kids. These were kids what we were. They were labeled to, which wasn't really fair. They were labeled what they call slow learners. Now, it wasn't that they were just non-academic kids. These were kids who they spent half the day just doing academic requirements for them to graduate. The second half of the day, they went to schools where they learned electricity, carpentry, plumbing, hairdressing, homemaking, those kinds of, and that was right for them, right? So, I mean, I love teaching all of my classes, but I love the challenge of dealing with the non-regents kids because they were right out front. Whatever they were thinking, you heard it, or on it. Well, one year in it was ninth grade, in one of my classes, I had a boy by the name of Harold Williams. The story, by the way, is called Harold and the Snake. Now, Harold was a wonderful kid. He was, I'd say maybe 5'4" in height, slender build. He wore an afro, right? And he, he had this wonderful smile that literally would light up a room. Now, Harold he was unfriendly. He would talk to the other kids, but he seemed to be very content in his own skin and happy in his own world. I would see him sometimes in the cafeteria by himself, but he wasn't lonely or felt he was left out. That was what he was feeling in that particular day. Sometimes he'd come in after school just to, talk with me. Harold loved two things in addition to his family. He loved baseball. You could ask him any question. He knew the history of baseball players, statistics, and so. And of course, we always talked about the baseball that was going on at the time. Harold just loved baseball. He also loved his animals. In his house, there were 3 dogs, 2 cats, a parrot, and his best friend, a harmless garden snake, which he named Phoebe. And I said to him, Harold, I said, Harold, why did you name her Phoebe? Well, Mr. Hawkins, I've always thought that Phoebe is such an elegant name. And I think my Phoebe is such an elegant snake. I said, okay, that's fine. That makes sense. So this one day, I just started the class. I took attendance, and Harold wasn't there. And I thought to myself, well, he's just absent today. So I was about 10 minutes to the class. All of a sudden, the door opens up. Harold walks in, and Phoebe is wrapped around his neck. And the whole class, including myself, froze. And I could remember the kids' eyes turned towards me, and I could hear them just saying, okay, how are you going to handle this one? So I said, Harold, stop the door. Harold, I see you brought Phoebe to school today. He said, yeah, yes, I did, Mr. Hawkins. I said, Harold, first of all, and just so everybody is not scared, I said, Phoebe is not a danger, and she's not poison. Oh, no, Mr. Hawkins, she's just an ordinary garden snake. She said, it wouldn't hurt any. She can come up actually and pet her. I say, okay. I said, why did you bring Phoebe to school today? Well, Mr. Hawkins, there was a terrible fight in my house. My sisters, my two older sisters, they really got into it. They were arguing and they were throwing things and so forth. And Phoebe got so upset that I couldn't get her to calm down in her chair, in her cage, so far. And I just didn't want to leave her on her own. So he said, sometimes when it's good to take her out. He said, I have this, you can see with my coat, I have this coat with very deep pockets. So I took Phoebe out and I put her into the deep pockets of my coat. I brought her into school, and when nobody was looking, I put her in my locker. Now there's little slits on the locker where the air comes in, so I figured she'd be okay for a while. So then, it says half the day is almost over, and I thought maybe she be a little bit need a little air. So I figured I could bring her into your class, and I wouldn't get into trouble. So I said, well, okay, Harold. I said, that's fine. You're not going to get in trouble. I says, Harold, but I just want to let you know, I guarantee you're not going to get in trouble, but I do have to do something. I said, I have to call Miss Manty, who was the vice principal of our school. So I said, and she'll probably maybe help you get, Phoebe home and so forth. So I called Teresa Manty, who I had a good relationship with, and the kids really respected her. I explained to her what had happened. I said, look, don't punish him. I said, he didn't mean anything. He was just going on his emotions and the situation. So Teresa Manty took Harold, and she did. She drove him home with Phoebe. And in the course of driving her home, she explained to him why it probably wasn't a good idea to bring Phoebe to school. So the next day, class is about to start. Harold raises his hand. Mr. Hawkins? I said, yes, Harold. I'd like to, I want to apologize to you and the class for the disturbance I caused yesterday. Miss Manty explained to me what I did, that it wasn't really a good thing to do, that I could have upset an awful lot of people. I apologize. It'll never happen again. Well, thank you. Thank you, Harold. That's good. I said we all learn lessons in life. And one of the kids, one of the girls, wanted to know, Harold, how's Phoebe today? And of course, that was the most interesting them. Well, Harold moved on to the high school after my class. It was in the junior high. And he would come back on a fairly regular basis, and we talk about his family. And guidance had told me that he was a one-parent family. His mom was raising him and his two sisters. And so we talk about how things were going. We always talk about baseball. And we talked about his animals and Phoebe. He graduated from the high school, and then his parents decided to move. His mother decided they would move back to Georgia, where his parents were finally from. And for a while, Harold and I exchanged letters back and forth. He was going to a local college. He was taking courses that eventually would lead to he wanted to be a veterinarian. And then the letters stopped. Right. Now, I wrote a couple of additional letters, hoping I would eventually get a response, but unfortunately, I didn't. And I tried the telephone number that Harold had gave me, and when I called the number, I got a response that was no longer operating. Well, that's over 50 years ago. I have not seen or heard from Harold Williams, but as you can see, he has a permanent place in my memory. And I wonder regularly, and I think positively, that Harold is a veterinarian someplace. He's married a wonderful person. He has wonderful children, and my hope, he's enjoying a wonderful life. Thank you very much.
And you for the story.
Harold and the Snake. So, yeah, I do. I still can see him, So.
Let's hope he's alive and well and is
Yes, that's yeah. I hope that, So, yeah, I think. Well, I know I don't know everything about his family situation, but as I said, I just hope I hope everything turned out all right for them. So.
Let's hope that not only is he alive and well, but maybe, you never know, maybe he'll get to listen to this episode.
Well, I've tried to find. I actually went onto Facebook and so a couple of times. There are so many Harold Williams in the United States. They really are. But I haven't been able to track Harold Williams who went to Deer Park High School. I haven't found that. So I don't know.
It's wonderful how you keep these people alive in your stories. Well, alive and well, and the memory that you have of them, these stories that you tell.
Yeah, well, you know how it is, Simone. It's all for all of us. There are certain incidents, and there are certain people in our lives, whether we knew them 5 years ago, 55 years ago. There are so many that they are so clear to us, as if it happened 5 minutes ago, or I was talking with them 5 minutes ago. We all have that, and it's a great thing to to have. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, myself and my cousin Mike, who's the same age as I am, actually 3 years older, and I always say to him, I have to have respect for my elders, but because we grew up together, we talk all the time about the stuff that we did as kids, and it's as fresh in our minds as if it happened a minute ago. And those are wonderful things. Those are wonderful things to have, to carry.
We are the bearers of memory as storytellers, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Yeah. Yes, we are. Yeah. And very important that we have our stories, So
thank you kindly for a lovely session, and we wish you luck with all your performances and the nice job you do. And we will see each other on a Saturday morning for you, afternoon for me.
Okay. Well, thank you both
so
much. Thank you so much for having me, Simona. Wonderful to meet you, and I've enjoyed this so much. Thank you so much for having me.